wisdom,
prudentia,
justice,
justitia,
temperance,
temperantia,
courage.
fortitudo.
Applying ancient philosophy to modern life, this is the Sunday Stoic.
Welcome to the Sunday Stoic Podcast. This is Steve, and today's Wednesday, at least that's when I'm releasing the episode. And I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about upcoming episodes and a little bit about myself and things that are going on. Just kind of a midweek episode, kind of like the Wednesday church service. I know a lot of people go to church on Wednesday and Sunday. I don't have time to release an episode every Wednesday, but this week I can. I have recently, within the last year and a half or so, discovered the philosophy of Stoicism. And this podcast was designed to help me to learn alongside those who are also learning. So I'm not coming to you as an expert, as I've said in the past on other episodes, but as a fellow patient in the bed next to you in the hospital, sharing my experience along with you. There are times in my life when Stoicism would have been incredibly useful. I've lost loved ones unexpectedly and had a very tough time with it. I've always had a hard time. I've been very self-conscious about the fact that my glasses are super thick. They're so thick that if I take them off, I can't find them back again. I have an underbite, which means I'm a crappy podcaster. I can't pronounce words terribly well all the time, but to fix it is incredibly expensive and involves breaking my jaw and resetting it and things like that. And so I just have over time, it took me years to accept these things about myself, things that made me different than the ideal person that I was told I needed to be popular or liked or whatever. But I've learned, well, no, I'm okay. Not everyone's perfect. At 19, my hair fell out. Like, what the hell, man? Like now I'm never going to find anyone to love me or anything. But I did. I found a good wife who likes my head the way it is and everything else, and the way it doesn't mind that I can't see and I look funny. So life is good. But having Stoicism there to say, hey, there are things in your power and things outside your power. Stop worrying about the things outside your power would have been far more powerful to me than that's just how God made you. That never quite resonated with me in the way that Stoicism has. Perhaps it does work for you, or you're able to blend those two views together. But for me, learning to reevaluate and to look at things from an external perspective would have been very powerful. But that's kind of I've learned some grit growing up with a few of those. All of us have those weird little challenges. I hate to make them sound like huge challenges, but you know what I mean. Things that you're self-conscious about that may affect your ability to go out there and put your best foot forward. And I'm glad now that I can reframe my life and thinking about Stoic views. Now, a lot of these things I've come up with on my own. This, like, you're not going to change it; it's just who you are. Kind of advice you get from the Stoics. I've been able to apply that to my life before even knowing about Stoicism, which is one of the reasons I think Stoicism resonates with me, is that idea. I grew up on a farm in Ohio, as I'm sure I've said many times before, so I'm familiar with life and death and everything in between when it comes to animals. I also grew up hunting, and I still teach hunter's education today. And some of you may think that's kind of weird or maybe even hypocritical for a Stoic, and maybe it is, and maybe I'm not a Stoic, but I will call myself a porch sitter. How's that? If you don't want to think of me as, I don't think of myself as a Stoic. I'm making progress, right? But I'm a porch sitter. How's that? But I do hunt occasionally, and I teach hunter's education, and I really think that it's important to teach that because the youth sometimes don't have a lot of ethical training, let's say, or safety training from their families. My dad was a stickler for ethics and safety when it came to hunting, saying if you're just going out there to shoot something, for example, you don't deserve to have a gun in your hand, right? You shouldn't be out in the woods. It's much deeper than just going out and killing something for us. In fact, I don't have many trophies on the wall. I have one set of antlers on my wall, but mostly it's about food and enjoying food that's not been raised in a farm, food that lived free and free of whatever chemicals we're pumping into things, etc. It's quite healthy, and getting out in the woods gets you unplugged from the world, and there's companionship there if you have a hunting partner, but it does require a lot of ethics. Should I take this shot? Is it ethical? Will I have a clean kill? Because there's nothing worse than wounding an animal. That is the worst thing you can do in my book. That's the most awful thing you can do. So those are things that I do, and then I also teach when I get a chance to teach hunter's education. And so I've always had an ethical component in my life tying into farm life. You always treat your farm animals well, and then also in hunting, and just with the way my family treated others, I had a strong moral foundation in that sense, and a strong sense of right and wrong. Now, some of the things I thought were wrong have shifted over the years, but I still have that sense. But I know that what I think is absolutely right or wrong now could shift slightly, because philosophy changes your viewpoints on things. So I'm more open to change now than I was when I was younger. But I think it's important to think about why you think things are right and wrong. Not just what's right and wrong, but why you think they're this way. Just like if you believe something is true, it's not important that you believe it. It's important to think about why you believe it. Are they strong, valid reasons? So those are some things growing up that have shaped who I am today. Also a work ethic that I've always failed at, but I think a strong work ethic is important, and some people think I have one, but when I judge myself, I always find myself lacking. So that's kind of propelled me to where I am today, studying botany and wildlife management, and then eventually paleontology, and finding that I enjoyed teaching more than the publish or perish world of research and things. So I ended up now teaching biology, and now I also put out a podcast every now and then that a few of you appreciate, and I'm glad that I have a few listeners out there, a few of you from all around the world. If you listen back to my year-end episode, I had listeners from all over the place call in, and that was awesome. So that's a little bit about me. Now I'm teaching. I'm actually about to start teaching this summer, which is going to be really busy. I pre-recorded a lot of podcasts to help me get through. So keep that in mind. If you email me and your question doesn't get answered right away, I have several pre-recorded episodes coming up. So some of the things that are coming up on the podcast, an interview with Ward Farnsworth, who you'll be hearing on several podcasts, I'm sure, in the near future. He wrote a book called The Practicing Stoic that I highly recommend you pick up. I'd say it's my favorite reference book for Stoicism. It's a good read and an excellent reference. It releases in June, and it's very well put together. It has what the original Stoic said, and each statement is cited, so you can look up the original source. And Ward has his own commentary, which is very deep, thoughtful, and unique. So check out that book when it comes out. We'll also be hearing from Kai Whiting again, talking about taking Stoicism beyond the self. We think of it often as a self-improvement thing to get us ahead in life or to make us content with life or whatever it is. But we need to remember that we need to take care of the cosmopolitan whole, and we'll talk a bit about that. We're also going to be hearing from a friend of mine, Dr. John Saunders, who's a rhetorician. We're going to have two podcasts with him talking about we talked about rhetoric, so the art of persuasion, so kind of stepping out of ethics and going towards maybe logic, the logical component of Stoicism, and talking about that a little bit. We also have another episode about finding your own voice, remembering that Stoicism and living on earth in general is not just about passively receiving, but about speaking your own mind and speaking your own voice, speaking truth in the world around you. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. I also have a plan to release some episodes I always feel weird about this. It's like cussing in church. It's my podcast. I can't cuss on my podcast. So I'll do it here, and you'll hear it a few more times. I'm going to call it getting your Stoic shit together. But normally I'll back out and say, getting your Stoic stuff together. I have a 2-year-old now, so I'm really trying to not cuss much at home. But I'm really good at cussing. I just don't try to do it professionally. And I kind of think of my podcast as professional. I don't script it out like a lot of the other podcast folks do, the ones that have really good podcasts. I and stuff on my own show because I come up with a framework and then I talk. I'm not reading anything to you usually. That means it's imperfect and off the cuff, and sometimes I miss points that I should have made and I say the same point 8 times, but it's real. It's from the heart. It's just me talking to you. So I'm going to do this series on getting your Stoic shit together where I'll talk about, and I'm not just going to talk about ways to implement Stoicism right now. I'm slapping my hand on my fist right now. I'm going to actually try to do them and ask for your feedback about how you've done them or your input. So we'll talk about things like picking good mentors. Who are your mentors? We'll talk about things like exercises you can do to help you remember your own internal ethics and the things that are important to you. We'll talk about putting yourself into perspective, things like that, activities you can do to help remind you of what's important to you, such as like writing your own obituary, right? Like, what would you want your obituary to say? You could even compare, what would your obituary say today? And what would you like it to say when you actually die? Of course, that's outside your power when you die, but you can start working on being that person in the meantime. Try to be that person you want to be before you die. So those are some ideas I have in the future. And a lot of interviews going on right now just because school has been out and I've had time. I'm hoping to have Massimo Piliucci on the show this summer. We'll see what happens there. We might be hearing from Mary, the lifetime Stoic that we had on the show a while back, and talking to her a little bit more. So some crazy ideas out there. We'll see what happens. But until then, I'm a busy guy with my son and my wife and my 5-acre lawn and other things. But I ask that you keep in touch. Let me know if there are things you want to hear about. Let me know of exciting things you've read or found out. Let's have a community here. Let's not just be too isolationist in our stoicism. And forgive me for rambly podcast, because that's who I am. Everybody, I really appreciate the listenership, and I really appreciate my patrons. I have a handful of patrons giving a little bit of money each month. That really helps to keep the show afloat and helps me to slowly improve things from time to time. And that's an amazing thing to have a community that is willing to give back. And I will try to give you your money's worth as much as I humanly can. All right, everybody, from the bottom of my heart, Carpe Diem. Thank you for listening to the Sunday Stoic Podcast. You can contact the show at sundaystoic@gmail.com. You can leave a voicemail for the show at 501-503-3132. And keep in touch by following us on Facebook and Twitter. You can support the show by donating on Patreon, www.patreon.com/SundayStoic. You can also help us out by rating us on iTunes or whichever podcast provider you use. Thank you for your support. Carpe Diem.